guest today is Genesee County Circuit Court Judge Duncan M. Beagle. Duncan Beagle is a third-generation attorney and now judge. His grandfather, Charles Beagle, was the Genesee County Prosecutor in the 1920s. His father, John Beagle, practiced law over 50 years in Genesee County and was generally considered to be one of the best domestic relations attorney the county had ever seen. Both his grandfather and his father, John, served as assistant prosecutors in the Genesee County Prosecutor's office. Duncan Beagle also had that privilege. He has been serving on the Genesee County Circuit Court bench since 1991, and he received his undergraduate degree from Albion College in 1970 and his Juris Doctorate degree from Detroit Mercy in 1975. Prior to his election to the Genesee County Circuit Court, he had been a court administrator in the 67th District Court, served 5 years, as I said, in the prosecutor's office. He was a friend of the court referee for over 4 years, and he spent 9 years practicing domestic relations and criminal law in private practice. Duncan Beagle has received many accolades in the community, including by the State Bar of Michigan as a champion for justice. Because of the import of this family, the Beagle family, I thought we'd break this up into 2 episodes because there's so much to cover with Duncan, with his family history and his many accomplishments as well. So the first episode will focus on Duncan and his upbringing in Flint. We'll talk about his love for sports, and we'll talk about some of his accomplishments and projects on the bench today. Without any further ado, here is Duncan Beagle. Okay, this is Radio Free Flint. This is Arthur Bush, and today's guest, I have Judge Duncan M. Beagle. The M stands for McLaren.
Well, it's a pleasure, Art. I don't know how many people I'd be talking to on Easter morning, but we go way back, so it's my pleasure as well.
You are a Flint native, and you attended Flint schools.
Junior high, then Flint Southwestern High School. In fact, I remember running into Bill Ballinger one day, and we were talking about where we went to school, and he said, "Where'd you go to school?" I said, "I went to Zimmerman." In fact, I still remember the fight song. Zimmerman Clippers will fight for you, onward to victory for the gold and blue. And he looked at me and he said, "You are one strange guy." But I still remember that song.
Were you the star of the basketball team there?
Oh, I was one of the players as well. You know, we were okay. We were mediocre, about a 500 team.
You were raised in the city of Flint.
Yep, right on Miller Road.
And then you went on to Southwestern High School, my alma mater as well. At Southwestern, where you played sports at Southwestern?
Football, basketball, and baseball.
What sport do you think you were best at?
Baseball, because that's what I went on and played in college.
You graduated with some pretty interesting and successful people in your class. Tell us about a few of those guys.
Yeah, you know, we lived at the south end of the county, and as you well know, there was a lot of middle class and upper middle class families. There were a lot of prominent families that lived over off of Miller Road on Parkside Drive, Westward Drive, Hawthorne. One of my close friends was Tom Scaff, whose family's been in the furniture carpet business for well over 100 years. Trying to think of other prominent people. The postmaster at that time was a guy by the name of Schwartz, and his daughter and I were best of friends. So yeah, a lot of really good families that lived in that area. And I had a paper route on Miller Road that was right between Chelsea Circle and Lincoln Drive. And some of the interesting people I met, not only that I went to school with, but the former mayor of Flint, I think, was Oz Kelly, and one of Flint's greatest lawyers, Walt Crapel. And at 10, 11, 12 years old, you didn't appreciate who these prominent people were, but it was a great neighborhood to live in back in those days.
And Flint was inviting it. Did it have the community school concept when you were going to school at Zimmerman?
Yeah, they did. I don't know that we fully appreciated it then. I can remember being at Southwestern High School, and after we'd be done with practice, I remembered some of these adults coming in for classes. And I had no idea really what it was, other than people were coming in the building to, get further educated. It was only later in life that you realized how lucky we were, because as you well know, people from around not only the country, from around the world came in to learn about community education. And it all started here in Flint, Michigan. Sometimes I'll go out when I'm talking to different groups and I said, listen, Flint's got to be the comeback city. I said, we should all have a goal that if you want to know how to rebuild an old industrial city, go to Flint, Michigan. That's how people came to Flint. A lot of people to visit us in the old days was to learn about community education. So yeah, we were very fortunate.
Part of that community education concept involved not just making a school centered around the kids, but actually the whole community. It was sort of a community building project as well.
It really was. As you well know, Flint schools were open from 7 o'clock in the morning until probably 10 o'clock at night. It was amazing.
I've talked to many people over the past year about Flint, many of them from places across the country. The expatriates of Flint have a strong affinity to the community, and the people in Flint also have that same affinity. What extent you think the community schools help to drive that? People have very fond memories of this period of time when the schools catered to the community and families and had ice cream socials and so forth.
Yeah, you're right. It was a sense of real community. I know, for example, in sports, at a younger age, you'd be involved in Mott football or Mott basketball or something, and you realized that you were very fortunate to live in a community with a foundation that helps so many people. But you're right, it goes beyond that. There was a certain amount of pride. I don't know whether it's because we were building the best automobiles in the world. Maybe there were other factors. We certainly had tremendous athletic teams that a lot of folks in the community were aware of. And it was a good cross section of people. There were so many people that moved to Flint from different parts of the country. When we were united, you were very, very proud to be from Flint, Michigan. No question about it.
One of the things that Sandra Branch mentioned to me the other day, who's the lady from the Flint Public Art Project that's done all those fabulous murals around town, is she felt that one of the strengths of Flint was its actual diversity. How do you see that? It seems like it's a town that had a lot of cultures being blended and molded into one. At least during the 50s, 60s, and most of the 70s.
No, I agree. You and I have talked to people that grew up in the north end of Flint, and this was before a lot of minorities came from some of the southern states. But there was like you said, so much diversity that went around the community. And again, I think a lot of that's due to where people came from, because people were looking for employment and they came to Flint, Michigan. And you're right, it was a hodgepodge of people of different nationalities. If you go back and look at your yearbooks from probably the 40s and 50s when minorities came up, when you look at some of your sports teams that started out, there were a few, and then we had those great rivalries when there was only two schools in town, Flint Central and Flint Northern. And there was so much pride that went into the Thanksgiving Day game in Flint, Michigan, that nobody had dinner in Flint until after the football game was over. And you would pack that stadium with people from all over the community, the north end, the south side, the west side, the east side. So it was really probably the 40s, 50s, and 60s was just a tremendous time to live in Flint, Michigan.
A part of that good feeling, or I call it affinity, I guess that's what social scientists would say, it's an affinity to a geographic community. That affinity still exists today, even though people are stretched across the country and have raised families in other places. How do you explain that?
That's an excellent question. I think there's a lot to be proud of from Flint. I mean, let's be honest. We all know we've got one of the finest cultural centers. We've got a really nice airport that we can all be proud of. We've got two universities, University of Michigan, Kettering University, well respected. We've got Mott Community College. It's a very well respected community college. And I think there's so many things in Flint historically to be proud of. I don't know if you've been in my courtroom, but I've got a mural. And when we totally renovated some of the courtrooms back when we added a part to the courthouse. And the theme in my courtroom is the takeoff of the automobile industry in the early 1900s. And you will see a mural that was done by a gentleman by the name of Davidson. He's passed away. But within the mural, we've got several of the auto pioneers, the Billy Durants, the Motts, the Buicks, the Chevrolets. And I'll sit there and watch people that are watching a trial or whatever, and they'll stare at that mural for an hour, 2 hours, because I realize there's so much there. There's a portion that's dedicated to the sit-down strike, as you know, back in I think the mid 30s, and it's just a incredible time to live in Flint, Michigan. Even though we're kind of on, let's be honest, we were kind of rebuilding ourselves, kind of adjusting to the unemployment, and then the water crisis hit, and that drove us back. But I think you're right. I just like your show right now, I don't doubt you probably get a lot of people that probably have retired or moved on to other states that tune into your show. And I think there is so much pride because they realized the city that they were living in the time was one of the hotbeds in the entire country. There was so much activity, so many positive, good things that were going on. Great time to live in Flint.
By the way, the show, only about half of the people who listen to this are in Michigan. The rest are all over the United States. And this show went to 16 countries last year. And there is an increasing amount of international interest in Flint. Duncan, you're a sports junkie. Would you admit that?
I'm a sports junkie.
Where'd that come from?
It's a good question. My dad was never all that interested in sports, to some degree, but not like I am, nor was my mother. I don't know. I guess it was something I was good at a young age, and it carried over. And I had some outstanding coaches that perhaps motivated me. I don't know, but can't really put my finger on it, but I just know it's something I always enjoyed growing up and still do today.
Well, the first time I ever saw you was at Lincoln Park, and you were at Lincoln Park in the south end of Flint, and you were on the mound, and you were throwing curveballs.
I'll tell you.
And I think I remember you were left-handed. I think it was left-handed.
Right hand.
Right hand. I remember the curveballs because I was a kid at that time, and I couldn't figure out how to hit a curveball to save my life. You figured out how to throw one that baffled the hitters.
Well, one interesting thing, and I didn't even know this, but when Atwood Stadium closed down to baseball in, I think, the mid 60s, most of the recreational baseball was over at Broome Park over off of Atherton Road. And I did not realize it at the time, but they opened up Broome Park about the middle of June. And I played and pitched in the first baseball game ever played at Broome Park. And we were victorious. I was playing for Genesee County. I didn't even know that until Len Hoyes, a journal writer, several years later reminded me.
Now, you went on to Albion College and became a baseball phenomenon over there. And in fact, my research tells me that you're in the Hall of Fame of your college for athletics.
Yeah, I played baseball there. I went out for football my freshman year, but when I walked in for the first meeting, the coach didn't remember my name and didn't know where I was from, and I thought it was the biggest mistake I'd ever made. And then I got on the Jaboofer squad, who ran the other team's plays in practice. And you used to get the HELL beat out of you every single practice. So I finally decided perhaps I should devote my time and energy to something I enjoyed a little bit more, which was a great game of baseball.
Well, and you finished your career there with a flourish. Tell us that story.
Going to school, I graduated in 1970, which was right around the peak of the Vietnam War. It was a really difficult time because we had the lottery in February of that year, and you knew if you drew a low number, you were probably going to get drafted. And that was when the war had changed, that a lot of young people were very much against the war. And so I drew the number of 157, and I knew there was a pretty good chance I was going to get drafted. So I had 1 month left in my athletic career, and I think my time and energy went into just finishing as strong as I could possibly do so. So I was able to win my last 4 games and, of course, pitch a one-hitter against Michigan State. And then several months later, had to go on to a military duty. So I think that that focus, recognizing how much your life is going to change, got me to appreciate 4 years at Albion. And in fact, it's interesting. I don't know if I ever told you this. Robert Griffin, who was the United States Senator, was our keynote speaker at the time. My dad and I met for a cold one before graduation, and I had a red armband on my graduation robe. And he said, "What the hell is that?" And I said, "Well, we're protesting the war." And he goes, "You mean to tell me you're going to wear that during graduation?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "The hell you are." Well, then mixed emotions came through me that here's a guy, my mom and dad had supported me through 4 years of college, and my independence of wanting to stand up for something I believed in. So finally I challenged him a game of 8-ball, pool table. And I was having a game of my life. He was a better pool player. And he had 3 balls left on the table, and I had 1. And I was so excited, the adrenaline was flowing. And I knocked that ball in the pocket, except the cue ball kept backing up and ended up in the pocket. And I still remember to this day my dad yelling over to the bartender, "Bartender, bring over a pair of scissors and cut this red armband off this young man's throat." A couple of my other colleagues, Jeff Netherkit and Randy Piper, who graduated with me, they wore theirs and stood up, and I stayed seated. And it was probably the better thing to do. But many of my classmates turned their back on Robert Griffin because of the war.
You went to school with Jeff Nethercutt at Albion?
Yep, we graduated, and Randy Piper as well.
And later you and Jeff sat together as colleagues on the Genesee County Circuit Court.
That's correct. Good friend. Good friend.
A lot could be said about your athletic career, but that had to come to an end. But you continued your interest in sports and your activity with athletics well after you graduated from college. Give us a sense of some of the things that you accomplished in that area, and what were what kinds of fun things did you do playing, taking up your passion, if you will, in the Flint community?
Well, a couple things came to mind. Of course, if you had played sports, my mentor, my second father, Tom Yotis, would find you, and you had to be a participant on the Lawyers softball team. And so we had the likes of Timbo Gracchus and Denny Lazar, Sam Ragnone, and anybody that looked like they're an athlete, you would get a call from the judge. And even if you didn't feel like playing softball, you kind of felt an obligation to Father Tom. So we had some great Lawyers softball teams back in that time. And I had a coach at Albion College, Morley Fraser, that got me into sports officiating. And so for about 20, 25 years, until I came down with my physical issue, I officiated high school basketball, which was really, really fun because it got you around. You got to meet a lot of the community. And I wish I'd had more time to perhaps to have done that, maybe done some football and baseball, but time didn't permit it. But definitely enjoyed it. And of course, as you well know, I got involved in the Atwood Stadium project, make sure we restored that beautiful historical facility. So those 3 things I think have kept me active with sports.
Officiating Saginaw Valley basketball games requires a certain amount of physical conditioning.
No question about that.
You were running with the dogs when you were doing that.
There's no doubt about it. Really, teams back at that time were so highly skilled, it's hard to believe, but they were easier games to officiate because the skill level was so good. You had to make some tough calls. The teams were so fundamentally sound. It was as much fun to watching the game as it was officiating it.
Duncan, you've helped a lot of kids and mentored a lot of kids along the way, especially athletes. Some of the more memorable ones for our entire community. I mean, we have all our favorites, and we've all had, some great moments watching high school athletics. But we had a crew in 2000 that played for who I think is one of the greatest coaches in the history of the college game, Tom Izzo. And we had four young men that went down to Michigan State and played for Izzo. You knew those people.
It's funny. When I was a practicing lawyer, I sponsored some youth teams, and we called them the legal Beagles. We had a Beagle dog on the front of their shirts. But one of the teams I sponsored just happened to have a 11-year-old kid by the name of Mateen Cleves and one of his friends by the name of Robert Smith, who ended up in the National Football League. And as a result of that, I got to know those folks. There was Robert's brother, Antonio Smith. There was Charlie Bell, who went to Southwestern, of course, Morris Peterson, whose father was in education. And I think one of the best memories I have is not only following those guys all that year and the tremendous pride they gave to the community, but at the spur of the moment, I got two guys and we went down to Indianapolis for the national championship game, not knowing whether we would get any tickets or not. We were able to get tickets. We went to the game. And I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I went down to the hotel lobby where somebody had given us a room. And the first person I ran into was Tom Izzo about 6 o'clock in the morning because he was going to do all the morning talk shows. I had a chance to talk to him for about 10 minutes. And it was just one of those great memories where Flint was just being highlighted. You were very, very proud of those four young men from Flint, Michigan.
Those guys became known as the Flintstones. Where did that come from? People called themselves Flintoids, I remember.
Yeah.
And Flintstones, I don't know. I don't remember it before then. Do you?
It may have come from the cartoon character. And I can still remember somebody around town that did a sketch of the Flintstones and incorporated our four basketball players into it. I don't know if that's exactly where it came from, but as you well know, there's stories that go around the community. But what a great nickname, because people still talk about that when they talk about the history of basketball, especially college basketball. They'll go back to 2000, those four young men from Flint, Michigan. In fact, you may remember this because I think you were the prosecutor at the time. Ted Koppel was doing a show related to that story out of Beecher where the young kid had taken a pistol and shot a girl, and it got a lot of notoriety. And as I recall, traveling back from the national championship game, they were trying to get a hold of you, as I recall, and somehow they tracked me down because I had sentenced the father of the youth when the media came through town. They just happened to have my number. I hadn't shaved or cleaned up or anything. They said, "Well, you want to do a show with Ted Koppel?" And I said, "Well, what do I have to do?" They said, "Well, we're on a time deadline. Can you go to your local studio, WJRT in Flint?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but I haven't cleaned up or anything." He said, "Well, that's all right. Don't worry about it." So I go over to WJRT, and the next thing I know, this was before they started the interview, I'm talking to my hero, Ted Koppel. You may have had a chance to speak with him, and what a warm, friendly guy. And Flint was getting the bad publicity out of that Mount Morris shooting, the tragedy. I said to Mr. Koppel, "Mr. Koppel, Flint's getting a bad rap these days. Any way you can incorporate that basketball game from last night with our Flintstones?" And he chuckled and he goes, "I'd love to. I watched that game." But he said, "This thing is really scripted. I just don't think we can." And to this day, I still can't remember what Ted Koppel asked me or what I said. I just know it was one of those memories that it was the day following the national championship.
I've forgotten that you did that show because I watched it. And I had participated in various interviews with Ted Koppel, including Ted Koppel telling me if I'm ever in Washington to call him, which somehow they found out I was coming to Washington and invited me to their studio.
Good guy. I really like Ted Koppel.
And I interviewed with Ted Koppel that day, that evening, in his studio in Washington, D.C., and I got to know him, and he gave me a tour of the studio. The words that you used in that case were so prophetic and were so incisive, it's insightful into the community that I've given some thought to making sure that the public doesn't forget that. Not only that incident, which broke everybody's heart in Flint and across the country. There were a lot of lessons to be learned from that case that came across our desks. Well, let me go back to the Flintstones on a more lighter note. Those guys, they represented something to the people of Michigan, and especially to Flint. What was that you think they represented?
You know, the interesting thing, there were 4 high schools in the community at that time. And as I recall, I think they attended 3 out of the 4 high schools. So the entire community from each of those schools really took a lot of pride. As I recall, I think 2 of them had educators in their family. I think Charlie Bell and Morris Peterson. Gene Cleves had a father and mother that were well known around town. So I just, it was one of those things I think we latched onto. The other thing, you know, when you think about Flint historically, it was a work hard, play hard type community, a lot of blue collar people. And that's the way those guys played the game. If you knew anything at all about Mateen Cleves, boy, I'll tell you what, he was just a born natural leader. He didn't become successful in the NBA, but in terms of a leader, you wouldn't have found a better one than Mateen Cleves.
Yeah, well, he was the number 1 draft pick.
Yeah.
And that's not so bad. Toughness and the strength that they represented and the determination came to represent to the people of Flint exactly what it means to be a Flintstone, not just on a basketball court, but in life.
I'll tell you one other thing. I'm talking to some of the coaches and athletic directors, and we're going to try and create a Flintstone Classic for the beginning of high school basketball and see if there's any interest. And one of the reasons for it is to keep that history alive, so a lot of young people realize what these gentlemen were all about.
What I've also experienced doing this podcast and talking to as many people as I have is that there are people now that refer to themselves as Flintstones.
I think that's true.
It's transcended sports.
I think it has.
What's it mean to be a Flintstone?
That's a good question.
In a bigger sense of the word, what is it that a Flintstone means? And let me start out by asking, are you a Flintstone?
Absolutely. I think it's pride in your community, hard work, because every one of those guys worked at their trade and they all became successful. But I think it was their style of play. They were dedicated to their family and community, and they represented a community that just knew how to, you know, if you remember the Pistons, I think they had that image with Ben Wallace and Lambeer and some of those guys about that, bring your lunch bucket and it's time to go to work. And I think all of them came from working families. And I think a lot of people in Flint, you know, certainly recognize that.
Your involvement in the Flint community has been absolutely unparalleled in terms of its effect. You're not just a judge. You've taken the role of community leader, and that started way before you were ever put on the bench by Governor John Engler. You have received, I mean, obviously you've been given a lot of accolades for your efforts, but starting way back, you had an interest in helping young people and kids, especially through various programs, including the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. How did you get interested in that program? What role did you play? And are you still involved?
Yeah, one of my closest friends who went to Albion College with me was a guy that anybody around the Flint area remember. He's passed away, was Gary Haggard. And Gary knew that I liked young people, and he got me involved when I came back from law school. And ended up with 4 little brothers over the years, was involved in a lot of their activities, their bowling events and so forth. And it was of all the boards that I've ever been on, that one was easily the most fun. It was upbeat, went into the community, gave speeches, you were dealing with young people all the time. But a lot of that, the credit goes to Gary Haggard, no question about it.
Yeah, no, at one time I think you told me that you had, I forget how many little brothers. I mean, as you were working with them, they grew up, and then somehow I thought you continued to serve as a big brother.
Yeah, in fact, kind of an informal little brother right now who community knows. This was a young man by the name of Willie McQueen, who played high school football with no legs. And I read about the story, and he went to Southwestern, and I was bound and determined I was going to locate him. And I found out that he lived over behind Hurley Hospital, and I got the address, and there were tennis shoes hanging over the electrical wires when I was going down the street. I finally found the house, and he came out at the age of 14 in his wheelchair, and we met, and it took a while to really get to know him, but I'll tell you what, I to this day, for a young man just to say he wants to be one of the guys to play high school football on the defensive line, he's like a second son to me to this day. We talk to each other at least once a week, and he's really my inspiration because anybody who I've never one time heard the kid complain, but I think being around young people like that can teach us all a lesson. He certainly taught me and many others a big lesson.
You also have been involved in other activities in the community. Can you tell us about some of those other things that you've done without being so modest?
Well, I've been involved in a lot of boards and organizations, and I think a lot of times people get recruited to be on boards, and I found out that besides our legal activities and a lot of the boards and committees and things like that, be involved in something you really enjoy. So I think anything that's been sports related or youth related, I've been involved in a number of those kinds of activities. I'm still on the board of the Greater Flint baseball and softball, still involve myself with big brothers and big sisters as much as I can. But anything that's kind of youth oriented, I try and get involved in because that's where my passion is. I encourage a lot of people that if you want to get to know your community, certainly serve on at least a couple boards. I'm still an active member in our service club of the Flint Rotary Club. I backed off a little bit because my wife tells me I'm better off trying to enjoy a little time at home, but still enjoy giving back to my community.
And you've also been involved one way or another with these various sports hall of fames that exist in Flint. Have you ever served on the boards of any of those?
Yeah, I'm on the board still of the Greater Flint Area Sports Hall of Fame, and served as president 1 year. But that's been fun because it's always good to look back at your history. I'm very close friends with Norm Bryant, who likewise is into their Black history here in Genesee County, and we'll compare notes all the time. And he'll educate me about the old days back in the 40s and 50s, and it's always fun sitting around listening to he and Tom Yotis talk about how life was before you and I came on the scene.
Yeah, for sure. I did a podcast with Norm Bryant, and he gave me a few lessons in history.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite people.
Your interest in young people has been legendary in Flint and in Michigan. You've been recognized by the State Bar of Michigan for your work with young people. Also taken that task up ever since, in the legal sense, ever since you took the bench way back in, I forgot even what year it was, 93 maybe, 91?
91.
Tell us about what you're most recently up to with that, and especially with the schools.
Many years ago, I got involved in truancy issues. You can't devote a lot of time to it, maybe an hour a week, but we now have an attendance task force in Genesee County from people from the social agencies, the schools, and so on and so forth. I've got a couple of specialized courts right now, which one is related to school attendance. I've got a drug court. I'm in the family division, so we have a number of parents that are petitioned in the court for abuse and neglect, and their primary issue is substance abuse problem. Yeah, I've tried to incorporate some new and creative ideas to address some of our social problems that perhaps haven't been looked at over the years. And so I've tried to pass that along to some of my younger judges, and I think many of them have got a little bit more creative and innovative in terms of addressing the issues that are going on in today's world. So yeah, I think I enjoy looking at things and saying, you know something, why do we do things this way? And is there a better way of doing something? And I think that's what kind of motivates me to try and stay involved and come up with some new thoughts.
Tell us about your program that addresses fathers and their engagement with their families, and your efforts to encourage them to stay engaged with their children.
Well, it's interesting. I had a law clerk several years ago, Tony McDowell, and he and I sat down, we looked at about 300 or 400 paternity cases. Now, the paternity cases over the last 30 or 40 years have grown just tremendously. Obviously, children born out of wedlock. And I never bought into the term of deadbeat dads. But when we looked at these 300 or 400 cases, we realized, and it wasn't any one person's fault, but it was taking well over a year to get a final order. So from the time you begin the case, and it has to go to Lansing and all the different levels of bureaucracy, I realized that you might have a father out there and a mother, and if they have some conflict, the dad won't be able to see this child until there's a court order. So we came up with we called it a DAP court, and our whole crusade is to try and track these fathers down. 95 to 99% of them are in our community, and for one reason or another, we haven't done a very good job in either getting them served and letting them know how to do it. And when they come in, one of the first things we do is try and get a genetic test to make sure that he is the father. We found out about 34% of the time from our studies that the individual that the woman has pointed the finger at is not the father. So this is a very complex issue. Bottom line is we're the whole goal or idea is to try and get these families together. We had some pretty good success up until COVID, where we got them counseling, tried to work out something where the dad would be involved as quickly. We were getting many court orders within 60, 90 days of something being filed compared to well over a year under the old system. So it took a little bit of satisfaction in knowing we were trying to make a difference, especially with so many kids nowadays in urban communities that are born out of wedlock.
Your program really had two goals. First of all, try to keep the father engaged with their children, which every study's ever been done shows that helps kids to thrive. And your second goal was to see that they financially contribute to the child so that they don't end up in poverty. Do you see that program that's taken up by the judges as being something that can be broadened in the Flint community as well as in other places?
Yeah, like I said, I think COVID has slowed things down, but I think we were having pretty good success of tracking these fathers down, getting them involved, helping them perhaps get some further education or job training so that not only would it help them personally, but also to help out in child support if the mother's the custodial parent. Yeah, we were beginning to make some significant strides, and I think once we get
Thank you for joining us at Radio Free Flint for this podcast with Duncan M. Beagle, Genesee County Circuit Judge. Part 2 of this episode will continue next week on February the 8th, 2022, when we release that podcast. Duncan will talk about the legal Beagles, his grandfather in particular, Charles, who was a Genesee County Prosecutor in 1929 when the Industrial Union Bank collapsed. The bank collapsed because its officers, who Charles prosecuted, some 12 men who had embezzled the depositors' money. The bank was largely owned by Charles Stewart Mott at the time. It's a fascinating story about Flint history. Duncan also shares his family history, particularly discusses his mother and other accomplishments of his throughout the years, which I'm sure you'll enjoy. Thank you for joining us again. If you'd like to hear more podcasts, please go to www.radiofreeflint.media. If you'd like to share an idea for an episode or you'd like to appear on Radio Free Flint, please send me an email at art@artbush.com. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.